Another evidence of the inspiration of the Bible, a divine editor at work, is typology, where people, events, and items could picture or foreshadow where the whole Old Testament story was heading, the saving work of the wounded Messiah. The Greek word tupos refers to an impression, such as a signet ring the antitype or reality makes in wax, an identifiable visual portrayal of that ultimate reality. The New Testament writers also referred to some of these as parables. There are some Old Testament events that in themselves seem a bit bizarre, but they make great sense after what they were foreshadowing, the first coming of Jesus, had unfolded. In Genesis 22, after Hagar and her son Ishmael were driven away, Abraham is down to one son, Isaac, and God told him to take his only son and offer Isaac as a burnt offering on a specific hill in the area that would eventually be the site of Jerusalem. In Abraham's mind, as they traveled for 3 days, Isaac was dead because he was going to do what God told him to do. When they reached the location, before they walked to the specific spot, Abraham told his servants that he and Isaac would go and worship, and then both would return to them. Isaac carried the wood he was to be offered on, and after asking where the animal was for the sacrifice, Isaac, trusting his father, submitted to what he thought would be his own death. But then God stopped Abraham and provided a ram as a substitute. 2,000 years later, God's only son would carry the wood he was to be offered on to the same spot. He would be the substitute sacrifice for us, 3 days dead, and then he also would be alive again after the offering. While several elements were clearly picturing the first coming and Jesus' death, Hebrews 11:17-19 tells us that Abraham had worked out in his mind that God would bring Isaac back to life, because God had made promises about offspring through Isaac, and the only way that would happen, if Abraham offered him up, was for God to raise him back to life. Several centuries later, as Israel traveled in the wilderness, the Amalekites attacked them. Moses told Joshua to prepare the men to fight the Amalekites in the valley, while he, Aaron, and Hur went up on a hill. When Moses held up his hands and staff, Israel prevailed. But when his hands grew tired and went down, Amalek prevailed. So Moses sat on a rock with Aaron and Hur on either side to hold up his hands outstretched on his wooden staff. Accordingly, Joshua and his men won the battle in the valley. What a picture! For just as we all have to fight our battles in the valley of this world, the final outcome of the larger spiritual conflict was determined by God's man on a hill between two others with his arms outstretched on a piece of wood. A little while later, during their wilderness wanderings, Israel was griping about the food and the water, so God sent serpents to bite the people. Rather than removing the serpents, God provided a cure. They were to make a bronze image of a serpent, the one accursed in Eden, and put it up on a pole. Whoever was bitten, if they looked to the one accursed lifted up on the pole, would live. Well, Jesus became accursed for us, and those who look to him as one accursed and lifted up are healed of our serpent and sin problem. While it is easy to find other things that appear to be similar parallels, the place to start is with those things which are identified as types or examples by the inspired writers. In 1 Peter 3:21, Peter said that baptism is the antitupos of the ark that saved Noah's family through the flood. In 1 Corinthians 10:1-6, Paul warned divided and complaining believers that what happened to Israel in the wilderness is a tupos for grumbling Christians now. Like us, Israel was baptized under the cloud and in the sea into their deliverer, Moses, had a special community meal, Passover, and Christ was with them, the messenger of Yahweh. But after deliverance, they grumbled and continued with idolatry, so they died in the wilderness and failed to make it into the promised land. In the book of Hebrews, Jesus, as our high priest, making atonement for us, is a central theme. Under the Mosaic covenant, the annual atonement ceremony, described in Leviticus 16, involved the high priest entering the Holy of Holies alone with blood to pour on the Ark of the Covenant to make atonement for the whole nation. As this was a high-stress responsibility, the priest had bells on his robe, and a rope was tied around his waist so that if he fainted or died, he could be pulled out. When he entered the temple, the crowd outside would wait in silence for him to reappear, for when he did, they knew that atonement had been made and the celebration could begin. Hebrews 9 verse 9 calls this a parable or a symbol for the present time, as our high priest Jesus has also disappeared into the true Holy of Holies in heaven. Hebrews 9:24 calls heaven the antitupos of the earthly holy place. So we await his reappearance from heaven's temple, at which time, for us who trust in him, the party will begin. Here are the other places in our New Testament where the Greek word tupos is used. Thomas wanted to see the imprint of the nails. The tabernacle was modeled after a pattern, the exact form of an official Roman letter. Adam was a type of Jesus. The form of teaching from apostolic sources is important. The pattern of how the apostles lived. The Thessalonian believers were an example to others. Paul and his associates were a model for the Thessalonian believers. Timothy was to be an example for others. Titus was to be an example to the young men. The pattern for the tabernacle Moses saw on the mountain. Elders were to live as examples for the flock. Aside from God wanting us to do so because it is right, it is important for God's people to demonstrate a pattern and example of righteousness in how they live, for it shows others what it looks like and that it can be done.